This
Getting cold.
conference will now be recorded.
And, I just got warned about the conference being recorded. So today, folks, we have a special, great, really interesting guest. Before we start off, I just want to tell you, the struggles in the community. There can be many diverse types of struggles, and today we had one. Alara had no internet, and I had no power. Okay, so we talk about communities. There's a lot involved. Anyway, so I'm going to introduce it's Alara Osterk. She is the community manager for Calico Tigera. Okay, and people say, well, what's Calico? It's a CNI, container network interface, Kubernetes, not only in Kubernetes though, and they have a great community, which I was very lucky to also become a part of. Calico Big Cats, we'll talk about in a second. But first of all, I want to introduce her. Now, the title of our talk, I've forgotten the title of it. I think it's communities and communities, IT communities or something. It doesn't really matter. It's the content that's more important. So I'm gonna introduce Alara Osterk from Calico, Community Manager. Hello, Alara. How are you doing?
Hi, Jeff. Hi, everyone. My name is Alara. Like Jeff mentioned, I'm the community manager for Calico Open Source. I'm good, minus the little heart attack that I had in the morning.
Well, it gets the adrenaline running. I mean, there's nothing better than to have a power failure or what, before a webinar or an exam. I mean, this makes life worth living, right?
Exactly. Everything is gonna go smoother now, hopefully.
It can't get any worse, can it? Knock wood, no. So can you tell us a bit about your background, how you got into this position, anything, some biography?
Of course. So I live in Vancouver, BC, Canada. My background is in computer engineering, actually, by trade, but I never really practiced engineering after I graduated. Um, I really enjoy interacting with people, talking to people, getting to know their problems, and hopefully at the end of the day, help them solve those challenges. For that reason, after I graduated, I ended up going into sales, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and very different route than programming. I worked at a couple of like different tech companies before I started at Tigera, and right before COVID, I was working in the sales team. I started working with the sales team at Tigera, and then that's how my journey started with Calco. The community management role came into play almost a year and like 3 months ago. We always had a huge community, as you might know, even before like Tigera as a company was founded. Calico has been around for a while, and it's like it grew with the contribution of the community as well as the engineers that are like maintaining it. But we didn't necessarily have like a person dedicated to growing the community or arranging community events or getting the community together. So as I was deciding what I wanted to do with my career, I decided that I didn't really want to be in sales, but I wanted to be still involved with people and, still interact with people. And then I had a talk with my manager, and he was like, "We are looking for a community manager, and I think it would be a great fit for that." So that's how I transitioned into from sales to community management. And I absolutely love it, I gotta say.
That's interesting because what you're describing has happened to so many people, i.e. their original education was in one field and then they end up doing something totally different. Although what I found in the IT world is only the other way around. So for instance, I did languages and I ended up in IT because I couldn't translate enough to make money. But you were in engineering and now you've gone and you went to sales and community management, which is actually a really unique experience because it gives you a much better view of all the mindsets, which we'll talk about later, because sometimes it's very difficult. So that's really interesting. I wasn't aware of that. So that's really great. So from programming to sales, so you had a big advantage over the other salespeople. It's like B++. What's that? Your mark? Your grade? No.
It is that's interesting, but I gotta say the like the field that we are in, and I think one of the benefits of being a part of the community is like keeping up to date with what's going on in the industry, right? Everything changes so fast. Like ever since I graduated, programming languages or like anything that's related to what I knew has changed, and I don't think if I wanted to go back to it, I can just use my knowledge from school. So yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge, and especially in the area of Kubernetes. That's a big thing with the Veeam Community Hub, whatnot, is we have a lot of people who have been in the IT industry for a long time and are facing a situation where they need to suddenly change their skill set. So that's another big role for communities we're going to talk about. So, okay, so you got the job at Calico sales, and then you eventually said you wanted to go in something more people oriented, and they created the community. Okay, and so that's interesting too, because communities, if we talk about the history of them, they go back quite a ways in IT. Alara and I were discussing this before the talk. The original ones were like BBS bulletin boards, used to phone up on the landlines, and then there were forums, Linux forums, and now there's a lot of them on Slack. Okay, so one thing I'll ask you as a community manager is the venues for or the vectors for the communities. Where do they exist? Because with Veeam, there's the Veeam Community Hub, which is like a web interface. I know that the Kubernetes types are more Slack oriented. So you could tell us about that and how it is managing those things and what their goal is, for instance.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that was actually one point that I wanted to bring up as a challenge. It's very difficult to identify where to find these people. Majority of our users, like you said, they interact on Slack or in GitHub. Those are the two platforms that I would say where I reach the people. But outside of that, there are also other people who just fly under the radar and they still interact with open source, but they don't really have a voice, and it's very hard to identify those people. That being said, other than the open source users, what I personally use to find people who are in the container and Kubernetes space, aside from Calico itself, is I usually look up like blog posts on Medium
Mm.
or any other platforms where you can find like blog posts that are written about like AKS, EKS, like platform based, or anything that's related to like securities and stuff like that. And I try to reach out to those people and see what their experiences are like and if they would be a good fit for the community. And I try to bring them in as Calico Big Cats.
Okay, and that's
Yeah.
interesting too, because you mentioned the big cats, and when we're talking about the communities generally have the consumers, people who will come to the community and look at it and interact to some extent. And then you have a group of people who are chosen by the organizations to become either, I know in the Kubernetes world, they're called ambassadors, big cats, for instance here, Veeam have legends and vanguards. So what is the purpose of that, do you think, from your standpoint?
So, what separates from people who are just using the open source projects versus who become the ambassadors are, I think, the difference is the people who become ambassadors, they are more likely to interact with people. They wanna get creative. They wanna give back to the community, and they wanna share their experiences. I think that's what the difference is. Um, could you repeat that question again, the second
Yeah,
part of
so,
it?
well, because as you said, what another thing was interesting about that, and this is where I'm kind of linking is you actually actively go out and try to get people into your community. Um,
Yes.
so there's that, but then of course with the big cats or the Veeam legends, it's like when people ask me, what is it? Is it a reward? I mean, is it just getting swag? Which of course everyone likes swag. Um, or is it that these people have done so much that you want to recognize them? So that's there's a different I've seen and I've heard from different leaders in different organizations, different responses to that. What is the purpose of these groups, the special groups, the Calico Big Cats, the ambassadors, the legends, the vanguards?
So one of the main purposes, like one of the reasons why I created Calico Big Cats and we have this program, and I think why the other companies have it, is like first of all to show appreciation to these people who are passionate about the project itself. Aside from that, it's also to give them a platform to get their voices heard. Because at the end of the day, my goal with Calico Big Cats is to give big cats a platform to express themselves. And it's not a prescribed way of like doing things. As you know, like I'm very open to any type of like content creation, like speaker opportunities. So it's kind of like rewarding the people who are loyal to Project Calico, but at the same time, we also benefit from their experience and knowledge. And by we, I don't mean as the company, as the community itself. You help like other people learn and you teach them as well. Does
Yeah,
that
exactly.
answer your
That makes a
question?
lot of sense because I know that for like there's obviously the benefits to the companies because they get people in there.
Yeah,
They try to choose people who have good knowledge, and so but it works both ways. So for instance, if I go and say I'm a big cat or a Veeam Vanguard, people will take me more seriously which is really what I need, right? With my hilarious nature. But no, but seriously, it gives you authority. And so what can happen, at least from my standpoint, is I can go out and talk about something. And it's not just Jeff Burke, somebody who's walking down the street. No, it's Legend and Big Cat. So they might listen more. It might attract more people. Obviously, career-wise, it's going to have a big plus. On the flip side, I think for the companies who said it creates interest, it creates content. Um, so this question is linked to this as well. How is it managing the big cats? Because I know with the other groups that I'm involved with, we all have different personalities. Some of us are really nice and sweet like me, but no, I mean, we all have different personalities. We're all human beings.
yeah.
We're not computers. So you can't just, press the power off button. How do you manage this? And have you had any difficulty with some of the personalities you've dealt with?
This is, I'm totally
Putting you on
being
the spot
honest about this. I never had a challenge with any of the big cats. Not from a personality perspective, I would say. I definitely have a group of people who are more out there. And as you might know, in our like private Calico Big Cat chat, whenever I post an event or something that needs to be done by the community, there are a few people who are always out there and who are always putting their hands up, being like, "Yeah, I'll get this done." And then there are the group of people who get excited to join the Calico Big Cast, and then afterwards that excitement kind of dies out.
It fades.
Um, yeah. So my challenge, I would say, is to re-engage those people and get a response from them or get them to do something. That has been my biggest challenge. But other than that, I haven't really ran into any conflicts with anyone so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about the communities are that the people are in there, and then the people who want to make the next step, become a big cat or a legend or a vanguard, are obviously people who like to deal with people. Because if somebody doesn't want to deal with people, doesn't like people, they might be
Yeah.
watching the forums, but they're probably going to be consumers and not give back. So I think, yeah, you're right there. I mean, so the other interesting thing for me about this is that with IT communities, you're dealing with your IT community, which is Calico, and there's the Veeam community. But at the same time, and it is open source, but of course there are companies behind us. At the same time, there could be competing companies behind these communities. And I've always been interested in my mind, like what happens if I became well, I'm not gonna name the other company's name, but if I became a big, I don't know, lion for some competitor of Veeam, I mean, I was wondering about that. This might be a top secret question. Are there any guidelines, like if the big competitor for Calico's there and there's a Calico potential big cat, but that person either works for or is already a big lion for the other company, does that play a role at all?
Um, I mean, we do have a couple of big cats who are like semi-competitors,
Oh,
I would
that's
say.
very honest of you. That's good. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's good that you asked that because it comes offers a big question to most of like even when we talk about my work in the family environment, they're like, how come you're wearing the competitor's t-shirt? And I'm like, I got it from a conference, like it's not a big deal. And it's just, yeah, it's a really good question. It doesn't really create conflict because at the end of the day, if there's something we can collaborate on and help the people who are trying to solve a challenge at the end of the day, that's what it matters. And my role and the community's role is not necessarily, of course it's like everything is related to revenue and stuff like that, but at the end of the day what matters from a community perspective is helping people learn and overcome and grow in their careers or whatever they're trying to achieve in a project. So I think you just overcome those differences and the competitiveness at that point, and you just work together.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And I'll tell you a quick side story about wearing the competitor's t-shirt. So like you, I'd be at conferences, and this was a Veeam on, and of course they're giving away swag. So I'm just walking by. They got to scan your badge, and you get a billion emails afterwards. But I collected all this stuff, and I don't even. But I'm not a good person for the marketing department because I don't read what's on the thing. Oh, this feels good. I'll put it on. And I went to my work wearing this t-shirt. It was a really comfortable t-shirt. And I'm walking down the hallway, and the CEO stopped dead and looked at me. And I thought, what have I done? I mean, it's not Friday evening at the pub, this is 9 a.m. And he's looking at me and he goes, what are you wearing? So I looked at myself, it looks okay. I didn't forget anything. And then he goes, no, that's this company, which was across the lake. I was working for a service provider, and there was another service provider across the lake, in the US, mind you. And I was wearing their beautiful t-shirts, wonderful. And so I answered, he said, that's our big competitor's t-shirt. And I go, well, that's the whole point. We're so good. We don't worry. We can wear the competitor's t-shirt because we know we beat them anyways. So that got me off the hook. It was a bit of quick thinking on the spot. So I started to actually look at my shirts in the morning after that, just in case. Okay, so that brings a good question about events, because we both
Yes.
mentioned that we obviously like events. We like getting swag and whatnot. This 2 years of COVID, of course, killed all events. And I've heard some communities saying, well, we're not just going to do them anymore. They were costly, they were difficult to organize. I mean, in-person events. And the reach out to people over these virtual events is enormous. So you'd have people showing up, 500 people at the event. If it was in a city, only people from that city. It's Veeam on, they fly in, but it's really expensive. So what's your opinion about that? And what do you think is going to happen in that area?
Um, COVID definitely took some of the excitement from the events, and we have been trying to overcome that. Um, but I don't think virtual events are going to replace in-person events by any means, because it's not the same feeling. Like having a virtual event, yes, you do reach to a lot of people, but I think the solution for that is having hybrid events, having it virtual and also in person at the same time, like KubeCon does, for
Mhm.
example. But in-person events, I think they're more personable and you interact with people, you get to know them on a personal level, and there's more of a human factor there. And I don't think it's ever going to get replaced by virtual events by any means. That being said, I have been contributing to virtual events mostly for Calico Big Cats or the meetups that we join. But one of my goals and the vision that I have for the future is to have in-person events, hopefully at Tiger's like headquarters or here in Vancouver, maybe in our office or somewhere else. Or CalicoCon is coming up this year, which is going to be virtual. Even have that as an in-person event next year as well, because I absolutely love in-person events, and chatting over some drinks with people is not the same as having this type of conversation. So, yeah.
And there's no power failures either, right? That's it.
No, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So
Worst case, you
you
just
mentioned
light a
CalicoCon.
candle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can't make a light a candle. That's right. So you mentioned CalicoCon. What is CalicoCon? And could you describe the cons to begin with? Because Veeam on is Veeam on, but the whole people who don't know Kubernetes, like it all, and I don't even know. Oh, conference. I just figured it out. It's from conference, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that was quick, Jeff. But there's KubeCon, there's CalicoCon, I mean, they all have their. So what are these things? What's the idea behind them? And obviously, it's a conference, but there is a bit of a different flavor, I think, to those than the purely vendor, type of conferences.
Um, I'll speak to CalicoCon. It's gonna be the first one that I'll be joining, and I believe they had one back in 2019 before I started. I have no idea what happened with that one because I wasn't here. But with this one, our main goal is to have speakers and get people to share their like use cases and experiences. It's purely on open source, and that's one part of it. And then we also have the security side as well. So the people who are going to be speaking at CalicoCon, and why I'm mentioning the speakers is it's mainly for people to like join and listen to them and learn from them and ask questions. It's going to be half Calico Big Cats. It's entirely external speakers, so it's more like community related. And then we have a couple of panel talks, as well as a couple of customers as well to share their experiences and show people how they're using network policies from their end. Because with Calico, I don't really want to go into product that much, but at the end of the day, everyone has like Kubernetes is a big platform, network policies, it has such a wide use for per use cases. So it doesn't apply, like what applies for you doesn't necessarily apply for what I'm trying to do, right? And we are trying to help people see these different use cases and take away what applies for them and take it back to their companies and help their own organization. So that is the main goal of CalcoCon, aside from the swags and the fun
Sure.
stuff
Flags
that
and
will be
marks.
going on. Yeah.
No, and that's an interesting point too, because I'll point out to people that Kubernetes is complex. At least it was for me. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but one of the, I personally say, more complex areas inside of the overall complex is the networking. And so it can be difficult. So the more help, the better. But communities like this will help out. And again, the network policies, as Alara mentioned, are very important because Kubernetes was not built so much with security in mind. It was built as a
Yeah.
container or orchestration platform. And so you are expected, if it's just normal Kubernetes and not, let's say, OpenShift or let's say Tanzu, where they might have already added some in, you're expected to provide the extras. So in other words, network policies will separate the pods from different namespaces. Otherwise, if you just install default Kubernetes, your pods and all the namespaces can talk to each other, which might not be a good idea if you have, evil hacker in one namespace and poor Jeff in the other namespace. There goes my wallet. So it's very important, and it's security as well. I know that Tigera is also involved in a lot of security stuff as well. But that's great to hear about Calico, because I think it's the same thing with a lot of the conferences. It's an opportunity to learn, to meet people. I know that, for instance, the Veeam user groups, at least the one in Canada, used to always say no sales, right? No sales, because
Yeah.
they want to be a user group, right? Not some secret salesperson in there. I did catch one once though, because I knew the fellow, and I said, oh, Jeff, yeah, I did my engineering just last week. I'm going, oh, sure you did. But that's an important point, because again, when you're attracting people to these conferences, I think, or organizations, the last thing they want to be is to let into a hornet's nest of salespeople, where you get the
Yeah.
email, hey, Jeff, that cup of coffee is ready. You want, it's like, I don't want a cup of coffee. I finally answered someone yesterday saying, look, I don't spend any money. I'm not the decider. That was it, gone. Never talk to me again. Okay, I've got another interesting question, because
Yes.
we're talking now about external communities, okay? But let's not forget there are internal communities. And so, as a little side note, next week, well, actually this Saturday, hopefully, knock wood, I'll be going to Prague, where Veeam are having the
Nice.
Veeam 100. And this is where they've combined two of their groups. They're like the Cats, the Legends and the Vanguards, but also a group called the Veeam 100. I'm sorry, the MVPs. We are the 100. And then there's these MVPs. They are Veeam people. So they've chosen people, or people have joined, and it's an internal community. And I know that other organizations are doing this too. So you have an external community, and then you have an internal community, and you can have joint sessions with that, because you have the same types of people, but obviously you don't want an employee to be in the user group community, because that's going to feel a little bit, that you might be pressuring or whatnot. But that's a solution. Have you heard of that? Have you seen that? Is Calico doing anything like that?
It's something that I'm working on for the new year. Um, so far, I have been trying to get up like Calico Big Cats up and running, and like getting people like comfortable with the program. And my next step is to, and I'll give you a bit of my secret. We are gonna call it
All
Calico
right,
Cool
oh, it's
Cats.
being recorded. One second.
We are going to call them Calico Cool Cats. So we
Cool
have Calico
Cats.
Big Cats and we have Calico Cool Cats. Um,
I like that. I'll
so
have to get
yeah,
a Cool Cat shirt, even if I'm not a Calico Cool Cat.
we like my goal internally for that is similar to our community, like regardless of people's roles within Tigera. I want to I want to get people involved as much as I can. So whether they're coming from a sales background or I don't know, solutions engineer or an engineer themselves, if they want an opportunity to talk to the community and contribute and help them learn, I want to be able to give them that platform to interact with people without being salesy. So yes, it is something that I'm working on. And hopefully in the new year we'll have that going as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I see, like, I'm really excited about meeting these Veeam MVPs because it's outside. It's not the service desk. It's not the help desk where you put in a case, right? So it's informal to some extent. At the same time, I mean, these are people who are the mindsets. And then the funny thing is, there are even people there, I think, who used to be in the community, but then Veeam hired them. So, I mean, have you ever seen that? The Big Cat's the potential like recruiting ground where you can like capture a big cat.
Not yet, but I do. We definitely have some talent in there, whom we might want to poach one day.
Well, I'm not talking about myself. 'Cause my boss might be poking, right. We'll finish the webinar. It's, okay, Jeff, here's your pink slip. Fine. Big cougars or big cat, whatever. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just that there is that temptation, obviously, because you do get in the community, some people are really fantastic. In fact, so that's another question too. I mean, right around Kubernetes now, there's this word called imposter syndrome. It's not word, but imposter syndrome. You hear it all the time. And I had people ask me, well, what is imposter syndrome? Which means they didn't have it, obviously. So the problem with these communities, one of the problems I would say is that you might want to go, you might want to join, but then how do you overcome this sensation? Well, I don't know enough, I'll look dumb. How from a manager point of view, because you must have seen that, you must have felt that with some of the people. How do you do that without encouraging people to, make, I'd say, bad quality posts, for instance? Not that people would do that, but you have to maintain a standard of quality while also
Mhm.
encouraging people. And that's something that might be difficult for someone who's purely technical, I think, like myself.
I mean, I try to give them as much support as I can. And as you know, like if anyone wants to contribute, and I'm talking about like non-code contribution, um, I try to give them as much support as I can. Like whether it's a blog post, I would work on it with you. Um, I tell people we learn from trial and error.
Yeah.
That's how I'm learning in this role as well, building a community. There's no playbook for creating a community or doing these things. You just get in there. Asking for help is very important as well. If you don't know something, I think that's one way to overcome the imposter syndrome. Like you said, just accepting that no one can know everything, right? And that's why we have these communities and that's why we're collaborating. And it's okay to ask questions and it's okay to fail. It's okay to try different ways. And if it doesn't work, you try something else. And if that doesn't sound good enough, you just work on it and make it better. So I try to encourage people when I talk to them by letting them know that these are all okay. And we also give them support, like not only myself, someone from our marketing team, if they want to write a blog post and they're not sure about like their grammar or anything like that, because English is not my first language either, and I'm not a great writer, but I have a great team behind me. So if I ever want to write something, I go ahead and I'm like, hey, can you guys please take a look at this and like correct and make sure it follows the guidelines and I'm not saying something, weird or, and
Your
they just
English is
fix
better
it
than
for
mine,
me.
so don't worry about it. That's my
Yeah,
Toronto,
so
my Toronto English. So we haven't figured out whether our English is American or Canadian English, so we're kind of mixed up in that sense. But oh, that's interesting. So that is actually another matter which you brought up, which is really good, is things, as you said, like the grammar and things like that. Because I know there are a lot of people out there, and this is a secondary question too, because when we talk about communities, we're not just talking about, Toronto and Vancouver, right? We're
yeah.
talking about the entire world. And so this is also a struggle. I mean, what do you do to address people who are, let's say, excellent technically, but let's say don't have a good command of English at all? So they don't feel comfortable coming on a webinar. At the same time, you don't want to lose their participation. I mean, I know that some communities will actually form groups inside the community, like specific language groups. Is there anything like that, Calico? And what are your ideas around that?
Oh, that's actually a good idea. I'll be honest with you, I never thought of that. Um, but that is definitely a great idea to consider. But for now, what I do is if someone doesn't want to be like isn't comfortable like speaking, or they just don't, want to be seen on camera or something like that, I suggest different ways of like participating. And those different ways are like blogging, for example. They can write about it, and we can always like fix what they're trying to say if it's not like what they meant. That's one way to do it. They can always contribute in code. They can always, one thing that we did was before we released, like published the Azure course. I don't know if you remember that. I think you also did a review for that as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
It was difficult too. I failed the exam twice too. I'll admit it. There we go. I
it
don't
is
do it.
one of the difficult courses that we have. So the course like reviews before everything is published, like I ask people to review those and give us feedback. Like those are some things that doesn't necessarily require any kind of like speaking or being on camera or anything like that. So there are definitely different venues that people can contribute in. It's just a way of, communicating at the end of the day and figuring out what they want to do, what their comfort zone is, because not everyone is the same, and that's totally okay.
In a way, you're like a coach and you know your
Yeah,
players, you know which ones to put in what parts of the field. Yeah. So you mentioned the course, and that's another interesting thing. So I'll just say right off the get-go that those Calico's courses are free and they're fantastic. And they're not that they're super, super hard. It's just I've never done much in Azure, and I decided to go into the course and try to act all smart. And, and then I'll just do this exam quickly. I did pass in the end, though, but it was very good quality, and I actually liked the challenge. I don't like it when things are too easy. But this is another interesting thing about these groups is training, and what training are offered, what courses, and what involvement. And I know that that's another excellent thing for people who are involved in the communities. You get the opportunity to like test the courses, like preview them, which makes you stronger. So what is the training component you see in the communities? I mean, is that something you're going to see is growing more? And does it? And also another question. I don't think you have courses that are paid courses, but I know some organizations do.
no,
And would there be a worry about competing with the education department? These people are going to lose their jobs. No, don't let them do it.
no. The all of our courses are free. I don't think we are planning on making them paid, or they're planning on coming up with any kind of like paid courses. On the contrary, we are actually working on a learning center, and hopefully we will have learning resources more than what we have now, which will include like workshops as well, or in like small like video forums if people don't necessarily want to commit to a course, or if they're not like at that level of knowledge, because courses can be intimidating.
Yeah.
And yeah, even though they're not like really, really hard, it still requires a certain level of knowledge. And some people, like we try to welcome people with like different technical backgrounds to our community and help them learn from scratch, right? So we try to cater everyone. That's why we're working on the learning center. But to go back to your previous question, I had something to say, but I forgot my train of thought.
That's okay.
What
That's
was
me
the
all the time.
question?
I just make it up
Yeah,
as I go along.
yeah. One thing that I wanted to mention is these courses and the community itself, like it helps in people's like professional development, like career wise, from two standpoints, I would say. One of them is definitely like when you're taking courses or like participating in like community events and meetups and stuff like that, you hear about like latest technology, and watch demos and learn about like new like technical innovations, and gain like best practice knowledge and how to implement and stuff like that. So that helps people in two ways. One, you get a new skill, and two, you help your organization get better and do better in certain areas as well. So I think courses are also helpful in that sense as well.
It lowers the support case numbers too. I think that's another good positive side for the company. Yeah, no, the training is fantastic, and the thing you mentioned too, which is really good for the people who take part in the community. And one thing I will say that is one of the best things about being in the community, apart from the swag, of course, swag number
Yeah.
one, is the fact that Veeam, for instance, and Calico will give some knowledge or some pointers of what's coming. So what new features, and for instance, prepare you for blogging and things like that. But it gives you a competitive advantage because you can then make your plans based on what you know, what direction you know it's going to go. So it is a two-way street because I've been asked questions, and I know, for instance, that from the user perspective, there are companies whose companies, what are you doing? A big waste of time. You know, you're just getting that for the hat and the t-shirts. But you have companies like my company, present company, they really encourage this. Oh, this is fantastic because they understand the benefits of this. So that's an important thing you talked about. And one question I have related to that is, if we're talking about the big cats, I was talking about the legends. Where do you see and what do you see as possible cooperation between these communities, apart from just having a joint webinar?
Um, my vision for interaction between communities other than the webinars is definitely like coming up with like new ideas. I cannot really give an example to those like new innovative ideas, but like when we start collaborating with these communities, I'm sure the engineers can figure it out.
Oh yeah.
But there's so much opportunity out there. I think with similar companies where you can come together, not necessarily like build like an enterprise level or like something to sell, not a solution like that, but I'm pretty sure they can just create something together.
Yeah.
And I would love to see that happen. I just don't know how to get there yet. We are taking it one day at a time, but with different communities, aside from the meetups, webinars, and the cons that we have been talking about, I think it would be nice to see that they create something together.
Yeah, exactly. I think your point about the engineers talking together, because one of the things I kept circling my mind is that, I do a lot of Kasten stuff with Kasten, and Calico is network security. So you have data protection and network security. I mean, to me, it just seems like these are like glue. They should be glued together,
Together, yeah.
So I can really see that, a bunch of engineers sitting down at a conference, again, live, not because I agree totally about your ideas about the whole in-person. Because when I went to KubeCon last year, it had been, what, 2 years of very little interaction. And so you have to get over the fear. I mean, I was very shy. There's people, I'm going to run away. But after that, you suddenly understand. You're having a conversation, even if it's technical, even if it's something, 1 + 1
Yeah.
= 2. You're getting ideas. Things are going faster. There's obviously a level of communication which exists in a real live person engagement that you just don't get over the video screen. And I don't know what that is, but I realized that after talking with some of these people who, I'd seen virtually, and then these people really I looked up to, technically, wow, that's what's his face. And you talk to them, I get more ideas, that the conversation would bounce back and forth. So I think that's important. But yeah, so I think that if there were joint events, what you'd have is a bunch of people, even the community managers talking together. Who knows what could come out of that, right? But the engineers would
Yeah,
definitely,
that's true.
even if they talk about the swag, make feature requests. So on the note of features requests too, is the community a good place to put in features requests, do you think, or do you think that should be kept? So where would you draw the line? This is a good question, because there's the
Um,
service desk of the company, and there's free support for
yeah,
community edition software. And
yeah.
then there's the communities. And I've seen this in the Veeam situation. Sometimes people asking questions, someone will say, well, that really is a support question. Like, what do you think as a manager? How would you deal with that in your setup?
I usually take those questions to our engineering team. Because like we have so many smart people in the industry and in the community who are not like necessarily Calico big cats only. They put their requests through GitHub is what I have seen.
Mm.
And what happens is we usually like take those questions or requests or ideas to our engineering team, and they have only so much bandwidth to really like bring them to life. Um, so I just take them to our engineering team and see what they have to say about it, because I'm not very technical myself. And I keep an eye out on the questions and the requests and everything, and I make sure that they're heard. but I don't make the final decision of like what happens with them.
I just see that the chat's been, I was trying to look at the chat. I was go to webinar. I couldn't find it, so I ignored it. And now I see there's a whole bunch of questions there. So please forgive me. It's the Jeff Burke style of doing this. It's like the guy in the pizza shop. You know, he's doing two at the
Yeah.
same time. They both fall on the floor. So I see that Rick's asked a question for Lara. Where does the community sit in the organization? It's a good question.
Rick, are you asking about the Calico Big Cats as the community program,
Well,
or
more specifically, like, are you sitting in marketing? You report to product teams, sales? If you're the community mangler,
yeah?
where does that sit organizationally? Because I've seen it's not consistent, and not trying to shake up what I'm doing, but I'm just curious more than ever.
Um, when I first took this role, we were a part of the engineering team. And then we went through some changes, and now we are a part of the marketing team. But I don't report to sales or the marketing team itself. It's just our developer advocacy and community management. It just belongs to the marketing team now. And we report to one person, do our planning with him as well. I'm kind of like shifting into events planning a little bit too, because we have all these like meetups coming up, CalicoCon coming up. So my role and my responsibilities and whom I interact with within the organization just changes based on what project I'm working on. Right now, I'm also working with our like product marketing as well, and also our engineers too, because our engineers are the ones like who do the community meetings and stuff like that. But at the same time, when we are doing events, like I need product marketing's approval for example, CalicoCon speaker titles and stuff like that, so it fits the guidelines. So there's so many moving parts to it, and I hope it answers your question.
I think Rick does a lot of that too, by the way. He's also organizing things. I think he's the main organizer of Veeam On, which is huge. So Rick probably understands that.
Um,
Ah.
let's just say content experience architect is my fifth side job. So, but Laura, I think you hit. There's a lot of hats in it.
Yeah,
Broadly speaking, I think community touches a lot of things. It touches product. It touches an event strategy. I mean, an event that doesn't address community is going to fail nowadays. So
exactly.
we on our team, Matt, Alina, and myself, we report to the CTO, which is and that is even different in the orgs. Veeam is a unique model in the market, but we're like this real special middle, stakeholding to sales, stakeholding to marketing, stakeholding to product teams, involved actively in the event strategies. So there's a lot of consistencies that what you're explaining. Half the time I'm just like nodding my head, and I'm sure Madalena was as well.
I see Madalena's got a question as well. How do you engage members that are dormant? Well, she's got a big whip, Madalena, and she just hit a long distance.
I don't do that, Jeff. what I what I do is I usually try to like message them and communicate with them, and ask them what would it take for them to re-engage with the community. I'm like, if you don't want to write a blog post, like I also have these opportunities, would you be interested in this? I usually I try to post as much as I can on our Calico Big Cats, the private channel that we share. I post our events. If there's something that I want to work on, like I make sure I share that with the big cats as much as I do internally as well. And if a big cat wants to work on what I'm trying to create, I give them the priority to do that instead of our internal people.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I have seen that in communities I'm involved in. I have seen that what you said you hit the nail on the head, that there's some people who join euphoria, they get their swag, and then they dormant, and so what do you do? And there's different strategies out there, and it's interesting because obviously you don't want people to use up a space that could be used by someone who really wants to get there. And I guess so that's the last question. Well, not the last question, but what good question is, how do you choose? On what basis do you choose? A big cat.
You mean Calico
What?
Big Cats?
How someone applies to become a big cat? What do you? You don't have to give away the state secret, but
Oh.
what would be a good? So if someone wants to become a big cat, what should they be doing? Like, what would you say would be a plus?
If they have Kubernetes or Calico knowledge, that's definitely a big plus. If they have been in the space and if they have any like blogs that they contribute to on a regular basis, it doesn't necessarily have to be about like Calico. It's a plus if it is. But if they regularly contribute to other communities or they're creating content or they have their like own like YouTube channel or like yourself, like they're very out there with other communities as
Hey?
well, those are always a plus.
Yeah,
And I actually want to say one thing about like the swag part. I have one trick. I don't send swag to people who just sign up for Calico Big Cats. Like they need to do and they need
that's
to
good.
complete their initial contribution one way or another, and then they do get their swag.
That's a smart move, and I've seen that in some other communities too. By the way, I won't name the other community. It's not Veeam, but there's a point system. It's all impersonal. It's just that you've got to go and you don't get your swag until you've done a number of things. So I'm furiously working away. But yeah, so okay. Does anybody else have any questions? We're at I think 52 minutes. So we've got 8 minutes left, and I wanted to make certain that no one was missed in their questions. I'm going to go back through the chat just to make certain. Um, capture a big cat. Oh, Michael Paul liked that. I think Michael Paul wants to become a big cat. There you go. That was his hint. He's one of our Veeam superstars. So I'm trying to get them all interested in Calico. And okay, so no, it looks like no other questions from anyone else. So Madalena, do you have any questions? I mean, she was forced into Starbucks. We didn't have power. She didn't have coffee. She's typing. It is noisy. Yep, that's noise. Oh,
Yeah,
Rich.
she's in the middle of this the training thing, and I am in it too. But no, I got a comment. I mean, really, I think this is great, and I guess I want one more question for Alara that I think I know the answer, but I'm always looking for common threads across community programs, and like you said, Jeff, this is a GLUI. It's a natural adjacency, from the cast and backup and the networking container security strategy. And we see those parallels repeated in other parts of the Veeam portfolio. But my question for you, Alara, is what's the number one rule of community?
Definitely, I'm gonna say respect. We don't take disrespectful behavior nicely, I would say. Like respecting and welcoming of others and inclusivity is definitely one of the other things. Um, you just have to like respect people's backgrounds, their knowledge, their preferences. I try to encourage people talking about, technology because it's a technology community, and as much as like keeping the conversations around that and not like going outside of what the community is meant for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a good because every time I ask that to people, I get really good answers, and I'm trying to make a top 10 list of the most important rules. My most important rule is simply be present, and
Yeah,
um, I think community is hard to do. There's not much established best practices, and I think in many times when you're managing a community program, we're trailblazing, right? Madalena can concur. Half the time we figure it out as we go, or we ask the audiences their opinion. What do you think, right? Because I think the engagement's important. But what I do think is important is, sometimes there are hard conversations. One of the, I don't know if you've ever been, or anyone on the call, if you've ever been like a hiring manager, one of the hardest things to ever do is to tell somebody they didn't get the job, right? Like especially someone or you like and worked with before. One of the hardest things in community is actually letting someone know they're not going to renew,
yeah,
because these seats they're an opportunity. And one of the things that that Madalena and a couple others on my team look at is who would best use the opportunity for these, because at least what we do, we try real hard to give people experiences that they would not get on their own. If I look at the whole tenure of our programs, we've done things like help review the course for our certification class, and I've handed over the stage of big presentations at events and things like that, and products like this, like Jeff has done. And some people have actually, there's a couple of people in our programs that have never done a presentation until the opportunity presented themselves through one of our community operations. So sometimes there's great experiences that we give, sometimes there's hard conversations to have, but if I talk to other community managers, always their hardest conversation is the metrics, KPIs, and making the justification for funding and stuff. And I feel we've found a way to do that. But I have to look and say, who's the best resource for these seats? And then if somebody doesn't, continually like kind of exist as the best person for that seat, that is a hard conversation. And so what we've tried to do is always add different experiences where people can engage at their own level, right? And so the community hub
Yeah.
is a great way. Um, you know, I get a lot of like, what's the recipe? What are the numbers? And I don't really share those, and no community manager should. But what I do say is I use language like defendably subjective and numerically driven with consideration. People go through things, and we've had a situation, Maddie and I, where people reached out and said, "Hey, I've been real busy with something. It's really affected my engagement," and that's the consideration, that's the care and stuff like that. So that's why we call it. Jeff called it the Veeam 100. That's why we call it the Veeam 100, because it's the 100 most kind of impactful community people in the world for our brand. And we kind of do a catchment of care across them, and we work with our product management team as well for the internal employee part of it. But it's fun, it's very rewarding. I tell you, the camaraderie, the power of a community. um, I'm looking through the people on the list. We've There's one individual, we did a fundraiser when they had one of their children had an organ transplant. And what we saw, this was a couple years ago, that individual, the collaboration from, it was, trying to hold back tears, those types of things, where it's just the power is incredible. So community can do amazing things for sure.
Um, I don't know if this is gonna translate well, but I'm originally from Turkey, and we have a saying in Turkish, one hand doesn't make a sound, but when you clap with two hands, it
Oh, that's
does clap. So that's how I describe community. It's about like getting people together, and then more the better. You can make change and make changes in people's lives, and also in like workspace, or in like industries, or in technology. Like, it's overall, it's just an important unit, I would say. um, but like you mentioned, it's very challenging to measure experiences and report on the experiences, and come up with like numbers that is like attached to those experiences, and what people are like doing or measuring like success. Those are definitely challenging to report back on.
yeah, no, that's right. I mean, how can you measure happiness, right? So
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
But well, I mean, that's a fantastic talk, folks. I mean, we're at 59, so we went right to the hour. I mean, I could talk all day long. I mean, if my boss would pay me to, but unfortunately, he gets tired of hearing me. So I want to thank Alara again, and thank Rick and Madalena for having us on the Kubernetes show. This was an excellent show, and I think everyone learned a lot. So if anyone else has anything to mention, I think we'll call it a show. But thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest. I had a blast. And if anyone is interested in finding out about the Calico Bigcast, I'm just going to leave it in the chat. Um, Take a look. You're always more than welcome to join. And yeah, I hope you have a safe travel, Jeff. And I'll probably talk to you when you
Awkward.
get back.
See you later, guys.
Bye.
How do you turn this off?